All right, when we go to do factoring by grouping, we always look to see if there's a GCF that we could take out of all four terms. Since there's not a greatest common factor that we can take out of all four terms, we start by taking and separating the four terms into two groups of two. And so then we look at the first group and figure out the greatest common factor, which happens to be n m. Remember that we write that GCF on the outside. And then we divide out that m from both terms. Then we take and look at our second group and figure out the GCF there. The GCF there is 2, a positive 2. And then we divide a 2 out of both of these terms. When we go to write our final answer then, our one answer should come from the common factor here, which was 5 plus n. And then the other factor is going to come from the greatest common factor of the first group combined with the greatest common factor of the second group. If we look at our second problem here, we look all the way across four terms to see if we have a greatest common factor. We see 3's in common here, but nothing there. We see variables, but there's not a variable that is in common to each and every term. And then I see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. And so I'm going to take those 4 terms and separate them into two groups of 2. I'm going to take the greatest common factor of the first group, which happens to be a 3. I'm going to write that greatest common factor down and factor it out of both terms. Then I'm going to take the greatest common factor of the second group, which happens to be a positive a. I'm going to divide that out of both of those terms. And then I'm going to create my answer. My answer is, I have the common factor here, which is x plus y. And then my second one is created from the greatest common factor of the first group and the greatest common factor of the second group. And then the last one that we'll look at together, if I look all the way across, 4, 23, and 15, I don't have a greatest common factor. I don't have a greatest common factor in variables either because the first 3 have a w variable, this last term does not. So I'm going to take and divide my 4 terms into 2 groups. I'm going to look at the first group and determine that the greatest common factor is between 4 and 20 is a 4, and then also w squared. And so I'm going to take and divide out of 4w squared, and I'll be left with w minus 5. I'm then going to go to my second group. I notice that right here is a minus sign, and that tells me that my greatest common factor is going to be negative. And it's actually going to be a negative 3. And when I divide that out, that is going to give me a w minus 5. When I go to write my answer here, here's my one that's in common, w minus 5. My second factor I'm going to create from the greatest common factor of the first group and the greatest common factor of the second group.